Hey guys, tonight we are harnessing the river. The water is wild and untamed, but inside this wooden fortress, we force it to do our bidding. We are joining the medieval miller. We are going to operate the most complex machine of the ancient world. This is a story about gravity, gears, and the grind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, feel the vibration of the floorboards, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mill sits where the river bends. The river has always bent here, carving through limestone and clay for thousands of years, cutting deeper and deeper into the earth. The water moves fast here, faster than anywhere else for miles. That's why the mill was built here. That's why your grandfather's grandfather chose this spot. The current is strong. The current is reliable. The current never stops. Stand at the entrance to the mill and you feel it before you see it. The vibration. It comes up through the soles of your boots, through the packed earth, through the wooden threshold, through your bones. A deep, rhythmic shuddering that never ceases. Day and night, night and day, the mill vibrates. The whole structure hums with potential energy being transformed into kinetic force. The ground beneath you is alive with the turning of wood and iron and water. The air is thick here. White dust hangs suspended in the shafts of light that cut through the gaps in the wooden walls. Flour dust. It coats everything. It settles on the beams above your head. It drifts down like snow that never melts. Breathe in and you taste it, chalky and dry on your tongue. The dust gets into your hair, into the creases of your tunic, into the pores of your skin. The miller's clothes are always white, dusted with the powder of 1,000 crushed grains. And the smell. The smell is wheat and water and wood and rot all mixed together. Crushed wheat has a sweet, almost nutty aroma. It's warm and yeasty, like bread before it's bread. But underneath that sweetness is the smell of the river, that green, murky, mineral smell of water that has traveled miles over stone and through vegetation. And there's the wood, old wood that has been wet for decades, that particular musty scent of oak that has absorbed moisture and dried, and absorbed it again countless times. And yes, there is rot too, because no matter how well you maintain it, wood that lives in water and spray eventually begins to decay. The smell of decay is always there, faint but present, a reminder that the mill is a living thing that requires constant care. Listen, close your eyes and listen. There are layers of sound here. The first sound, the most obvious, is the water, the rush and splash of the river hitting the wheel. It's a constant roar, not deafening but insistent, a white noise that fills every silence. But within that roar, there are variations. When the water hits the buckets of the wheel, there's a heavier sound, a deeper thump as the weight of the water lands and the bucket begins to descend. And there's the splash as the water spills out again at the bottom, cascading back into the river below. And then there are the mechanical sounds, the groan of wood under stress. The main shaft turns slowly, ponderously, and the wood fibers compress and expand, and they cry out with each revolution. It's not a sharp sound, not a squeak or a shriek, but a deep, drawn-out groan, like an old man lowering himself into a chair. The sound of weight and age and endurance. And the gears, the meshing of the teeth. Wood on wood, hardwood on hardwood, apple on oak, hornbeam on iron. There's a clicking, a rhythmic clacking as each tooth engages and disengages. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. It's almost musical, this rhythm, almost hypnotic. The gears turn and the teeth mesh, and the clicking never stops, never varies, a metronome marking the passage of time. The mill is 4 stories tall. At the bottom, at ground level, is the wheel itself, half submerged in the river. Above that is the main machinery room, where the great shaft turns and the pit wheel drives the wallower. Above that is the grinding floor, where the millstones sit, upper stone turning on lower stone, grain being crushed between them. And above that is the grain loft, where the sacks of wheat and rye and barley wait to be ground. But we begin at the bottom. We begin with the water. We begin with the source of all this power, this transformation, this endless turning. The sluice gate stands at the entrance to the mill race. The mill race is a channel hand-dug, lined with stone, that diverts water from the main river and directs it toward the wheel. Without the mill race, the mill would not function. The river might flow past, but it would not drive the wheel with sufficient force. The mill race concentrates the water, increases its speed, aims it precisely at the buckets of the wheel. And controlling the flow into the mill race is the sluice gate. It's a simple mechanism, but absolutely essential. A heavy wooden door, thick planks of oak bound with iron bands, fitted into grooves carved into stone pillars on either side of the channel. The door slides up and down in these grooves. When it's down, fully lowered, it blocks the entrance to the mill race completely. No water flows. The wheel stops turning. The mill falls silent. When it's up, fully raised, water rushes into the mill race unrestricted. The wheel turns at maximum speed. The mill roars with productivity. But you never run the mill at maximum speed. That's the first thing your father taught you. Maximum speed means maximum wear. It means teeth break more frequently. It means the millstones heat up and can scorch the grain. It means the whole structure shakes more violently and loosens the mortise and tenon joints that hold the building together. Maximum speed is for emergencies only, for when you have 100 sacks of grain to grind before the harvest spoils, for when the Lord's bailiff is coming tomorrow and demands to see the mill operating at full capacity. Normally, you raise the sluice gate only partway. You gauge it by eye and by sound, and by the feel of the vibration through your feet. About halfway up is right for most work. Enough water to keep the wheel turning steadily, not so much that it races and wears. Approach the sluice gate now. It's morning. The sun is just rising over the eastern hills, sending long fingers of golden light across the surface of the river. The water looks black in the shadows, gold where the light touches it. Mist rises from the surface, thin wisps that twist and dissipate in the cool morning air. The mechanism for raising the gate is a windlass. Two wooden posts driven deep into the ground, a thick oak spindle between them, and a handle projecting from one end. A rope wraps around the spindle, thick hemp rope as thick as your wrist. The rope runs up and over a pulley mounted on a wooden frame above the gate, then down to the gate itself, attached with iron hooks. Grasp the handle. Feel the wood, smooth from years of hands pushing and pulling. It's worn down in the exact spot where your palms rest. Your father's hands wore this groove. Your grandfather's hands. Generations of millers have pushed this handle in this exact spot. Begin to push. The handle resists. The gate is heavy, waterlogged oak, and even though the rope and pulley provide mechanical advantage, it still requires effort. Push. The handle moves, rotating the spindle. The rope begins to wind around the spindle. Slowly, so slowly, the gate begins to rise. You can hear it, a scraping sound as the bottom edge of the gate drags against the stone sill of the channel. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound of wood on stone, rough and resistant. Push harder. The handle turns. The rope tightens. You can see the individual fibers of the hemp stretching, taking the weight. Inch by inch, the gate rises. And as it rises, water begins to seep underneath. Just a trickle at first, finding the gap between the bottom of the gate and the stone. The trickle catches the morning light, glittering, then more water. The gap widens. The trickle becomes a flow. The flow becomes a rush. Keep pushing. The gate is a quarter of the way up now. Water pours underneath, flooding into the mill race. You can hear the change in the sound. The river was rushing past before, but now it's rushing into, rushing through. The mill race begins to fill. The water level rises quickly, surging toward the wheel. Look downstream. The wheel is visible from here, a massive construction of wood and iron. It's an overshot wheel, which means the water is delivered to the top of the wheel, filling buckets mounted on the rim, and the weight of the water-filled buckets pulls the wheel around as they descend. The wheel is 20 feet in diameter. Think about that, 20 feet, as tall as a small house. It's built of oak for the main structure, the rim and the spokes and the axle. Iron bands reinforce the critical joints. The buckets are smaller planks, curved and fitted to form a series of cups all around the outer rim. 40 buckets in total, each one capable of holding perhaps 30 gallons of water. The first water from the mill race hits the wheel. It splashes into the topmost bucket, the one currently positioned directly under the sluice that delivers water to the wheel. The bucket begins to fill. 30 gallons of water weighs about 250 pounds. That's a significant weight, concentrated in one bucket. The wheel begins to respond. It's been stationary all night, resting, and now it feels the pull of gravity acting on that water. The wheel groans. Not the kind of groan you make when you're annoyed, but the groan of wooden fibers being compressed, of the axle beginning to rotate in its bearings, of the entire mass of the wheel overcoming inertia. It's a sound you feel as much as hear, a deep resonance that vibrates through the structure. The wheel begins to turn. Slowly, so slowly, the filled bucket descends. As it descends, the next bucket rotates into position under the sluice. Water begins filling it. Now there are two buckets with weight pulling the wheel around. The rotation speeds up, but only slightly. This is a massive wheel, and it has tremendous inertia. It takes time to get it up to speed. Keep pushing the sluice gate higher. It's halfway up now. Much more water is flowing into the mill race. The water hits the wheel with more force. Bucket after bucket fills. The wheel turns faster. You can see the rhythm establishing itself now. Each bucket fills, descends, empties at the bottom as the wheel tips it over, and then rises empty to be filled again at the top. Fill, descend, empty, rise. Fill, descend, empty, rise. Over and over and over. The sound changes as the wheel picks up speed. The initial groaning gives way to a steadier noise, a combination of the splash of water filling the buckets, the rumble of the wheel rotating, and that constant background roar of water flowing. It's loud, but it's not chaotic. It's rhythmic, predictable, reliable. This is what you've been trained to hear, this particular sound. Any variation tells you something. If the splashing becomes irregular, it might mean a bucket has broken and water is escaping. If the groaning intensifies, it might mean the axle needs more grease in its bearings. If the whole thing sounds rougher, grinding almost, it might mean a stone has lodged in the mechanism somewhere. You know this wheel by sound. You could stand here blindfolded and tell if everything is operating correctly just by listening. But the wheel is only the beginning. The wheel captures the power of the river and converts it into rotational motion. But that motion needs to be transmitted, controlled, modified, and directed to the millstones 2 floors above. That's where the genius of the mill reveals itself. That's where centuries of engineering knowledge and practical experience combine to create something almost miraculous. Enter the mill. The door is small, barely 5 feet high. You have to duck to get through. This is deliberate. Small doors lose less heat in winter. Small doors are easier to defend if bandits come. Small doors remind you to be humble as you enter this place of transformation. Inside, the air is even thicker with dust. The light is dim, filtered through small windows high in the walls. Your eyes take a moment to adjust, and then you see it, the main shaft. It dominates the space. A massive oak trunk, barely trimmed, perhaps 3 feet in diameter at its widest point. It enters the building horizontally through a gap in the floor, coming directly from the wheel outside. The wheel's axle and this main shaft are actually the same piece of wood, one continuous trunk that was selected decades ago specifically for this purpose. Finding such a tree is not easy. It needs to be straight, free of major knots, oak for strength, and large enough in diameter to handle the tremendous torque it will be subjected to. This shaft is over 40 feet long. It extends from where the wheel mounts on it outside the building, through the wall, across the length of this machinery room, and ends at the far wall where it sits in a massive bearing. The bearing is a block of oak, hollowed out to fit the shaft, lined with iron plates to reduce friction. The shaft rotates in this bearing, and the bearing is mounted on stone pillars that go down to bedrock. Everything is built to handle enormous forces. Stand next to the shaft as it turns. Place your hand on it carefully. The surface is worn smooth by decades of rotation. Feel the warmth. The friction of the bearing generates heat. The shaft is always slightly warm to the touch, even on the coldest winter day. Feel the vibration. It's not violent, not a shaking, but a steady thrum, a pulse. The shaft is turning at perhaps 6 to 8 revolutions per minute. Slow, ponderous, inexorable. Watch the surface as it rotates past. You can see the growth rings of the tree, dark and light bands marking each year of its life before it was felled. This tree grew for perhaps 200 years before it was harvested. 200 years of slow growth in a forest somewhere, adding ring after ring, year after year. And now it has served as the heart of this mill for another 80 years. Think about that continuity. Think about the span of time represented in this single piece of wood. But the shaft alone accomplishes nothing. It's just spinning in place. To make it useful, to transmit its power upward to the millstones, we need gears. Look at the shaft about 2/3 of the way along its length. Here, mounted on the shaft, is the pit wheel. It's called the pit wheel because traditionally, the main shaft sits in a pit below ground level, and the wheel extends down into that pit. This mill is built differently, with the machinery room at ground level, but the name has stuck. The pit wheel is enormous, 12 feet in diameter. It's built in segments, individual wooden pieces fitted together and bound with iron bands. The outer rim is thick oak, perhaps 8 inches wide and 6 inches deep. This rim is not smooth. Cut into it, all the way around its circumference, are teeth, cogs, wooden projections that stick out from the rim, each one perhaps 6 inches long, 4 inches wide, 3 inches deep. Count them. There are 84 teeth on this wheel. 84 individual wooden cogs, each one carefully shaped, each one precisely positioned. The spacing is critical. If the teeth are not evenly distributed around the wheel, the gear will run rough, vibrating and potentially breaking. And here's something remarkable. The teeth are not oak. The rim is oak, but the teeth themselves are a different wood. Look closely at one. See the grain, see the color. This is apple wood, or sometimes hornbeam. Both are hardwoods, denser and tougher than oak, but that's not why they're used. They're used because they're designed to break. Think about that for a moment. We're building a machine, and we're deliberately installing components that are designed to fail. It seems counterintuitive. Surely we want everything to be as strong as possible. But no, consider what happens if something jams in the mechanism. A stone falls into the gears. A piece of metal breaks off from somewhere and wedges between two teeth. The wheel tries to turn. The enormous power of the river, channeled through the water wheel, through the axle, through this shaft, tries to force the pit wheel to keep rotating. Something has to give. If the teeth were oak, as strong as the rim, or if they were iron, stronger still, then the weakest point would be somewhere else. Maybe the shaft itself would crack. Maybe the axle would shear. Maybe the wheel outside would be torn apart. Any of those failures would be catastrophic. It would take weeks to repair. The mill would be out of operation. People would go hungry. But if the teeth are apple wood or hornbeam, strong enough for normal operation but weaker than the major structural components, then the tooth breaks. Just the tooth. The wheel stops, yes. You have to remove the broken tooth and install a new one. But that's a job of hours, not weeks. You have spare teeth already shaped and ready. You slide out the broken one, slide in a new one, secure it with wooden pegs, and you're running again. The tooth sacrifices itself to save the machine. It's a kind of mechanical mercy, a designed failure point that protects the whole. Look at the teeth more closely. They're not just stuck into holes in the rim. Each tooth has a carefully shaped base, a dovetail or a mortise and tenon joint that fits into a corresponding slot cut into the rim. The tooth slides in from one side. Wooden pegs, driven through holes drilled perpendicular to the tooth, lock it in place. If a tooth breaks, you drive out the pegs, slide out the broken tooth, slide in a new tooth, drive in new pegs. Maybe an hour's work for an experienced miller. The pit wheel is massive and it's turning. The shaft rotates, the pit wheel rotates with it, all those teeth moving in a great circle. But rotating what? The teeth need something to mesh with, something to drive. Look up. Directly above the pit wheel, mounted on a vertical shaft that rises up through the ceiling, is the wallower, or the lantern gear, as some call it. It's a beautiful piece of engineering, elegant in its simplicity. Imagine two wooden discs, each about 3 feet in diameter, mounted parallel to each other on a vertical shaft about 2 feet apart. Now imagine cylindrical wooden rods, perhaps 3 inches in diameter, connecting the two discs like the bars of a cage. These rods, called rungs or staves, are the teeth of the lantern gear. There are 24 of them, arranged in a circle. The pit wheel's teeth pass between these rungs. As the pit wheel rotates horizontally, its teeth push against the rungs of the vertical lantern gear, forcing it to turn. It's a simple, elegant way to change the direction of power transmission from horizontal to vertical. But there's more happening here than just a change of direction. There's a change of speed and a change of torque. The pit wheel has 84 teeth. The lantern gear effectively has 24 teeth, the rungs. This means for every complete rotation of the pit wheel, the lantern gear rotates 84 times, or 3.5 times. So if the main shaft and pit wheel are rotating at about 7 revolutions per minute, the vertical shaft and lantern gear are rotating at about 24.5 revolutions per minute. The speed has increased by a factor of 3.5. But torque, the rotational force, has decreased by the same factor. We've traded force for speed. Why? Because the millstones need to turn faster than the water wheel, but they don't need as much torque. The grinding is done by the weight of the upper stone pressing down on the lower stone, and by the shearing action of the stone faces passing over each other. Speed matters more than force. Watch the meshing of the gears. A tooth from the pit wheel enters the space between 2 rungs of the lantern gear. The tooth pushes against one rung. The lantern gear rotates slightly. The tooth moves through the gap and exits the other side. The next tooth enters, push, rotate, exit, enter, push, rotate, exit. Click, click, click. That's the sound. Each time a tooth engages a rung, there's an audible click. With 84 teeth on the pit wheel and the wheel rotating about 7 times per minute, that's about 588 clicks per minute. About 10 clicks per second. Click, 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 click. A steady, rapid rhythm. This clicking is the heartbeat of the mill. As long as you hear it, steady and regular, you know the gears are meshing properly. If the clicking slows, the water flow has decreased. If it speeds up, the sluice gate might have opened further or a dam upstream has released water. If the clicking becomes irregular, stuttering, something is wrong. Maybe a tooth is cracked and flexing under load. Maybe there's debris caught in the gears. Maybe the alignment has shifted slightly. Your ear is trained to that click. You can be up in the grain loft, 3 floors above, and you can hear that clicking through the floorboards, and you know if everything is right or not. But maintaining that click, keeping it smooth and regular, requires constant care. The gears are wood on wood. Wood is strong, but it's also rough. Without lubrication, the friction between the teeth and the rungs would be tremendous. Heat would build up. The wood would char and splinter. The gears would seize. So we grease them. Animal fat, usually, rendered sheep or pig fat saved from butchering. It's kept in a wooden bucket near the gears. Every few hours, you take a long-handled brush, dip it in the fat, and apply it to the moving parts. Greasing the gears is an art. You can't just slop fat everywhere. Too much grease, and it attracts dust, grain particles, bits of chaff. The dust sticks to the grease and forms a kind of abrasive paste that actually accelerates wear. Too little grease, and the wood-on-wood friction is too high. The right amount is a thin layer, enough to make the surfaces slide smoothly past each other, not so much that it drips and accumulates. You learn to judge it by feel. When you brush the grease onto the moving parts, it should spread easily but not run. It should leave a slight sheen on the wood, not a thick coating. And you grease specific points. The faces of the pit wheel teeth where they contact the lantern rungs. The ends of the lantern rungs where they fit into the top and bottom discs. The bearing where the vertical shaft passes through the floor above. The bearing where the main horizontal shaft sits in its mounting block. Each bearing, each contact point, each place where wood moves against wood or wood moves against iron. The smell of the grease is animal and organic. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's noticeable. Mixed with the smell of the flour dust and the river water and the wood, it creates a unique scent profile that is unmistakably mill. Anyone who has spent time in a working mill would recognize it instantly, even blindfolded. It's the smell of industry, of transformation, of human ingenuity harnessing natural power. Stand in this machinery room for a while. Just stand and observe. Watch the main shaft rotating, that massive oak trunk turning slowly and steadily. Watch the pit wheel with its 84 applewood teeth going round and round. Watch the lantern gear turning faster, its rungs clicking as the pit wheel teeth pass through. Listen to the sounds layering over each other. The rush of water from outside, the groan of the shaft, the click of the gears, the occasional creak of the building itself as it flexes minutely under the loads. Feel the vibration. It comes up through the floor, a steady thrum that never stops. The whole building is alive with it. If you place your hand on one of the support posts, you can feel it thrumming through the wood. The vibration travels through the structure, through every beam and plank, keeping everything in a state of constant micromotion. This is what people don't understand when they see a mill from outside. They see a building. They see a wheel turning. But they don't feel this, the aliveness of it, the way every part is connected to every other part, the way the power flows through the structure like blood through a body. The vertical shaft rises through the ceiling, passing through a bearing mounted in the overhead beams. Follow it up. Climb the ladder to the next floor. This is the grinding floor, and this is where the transformation happens. This is where grain becomes flour. But before we get to the stones, consider that vertical shaft for a moment. It's about 10 inches in diameter, hewn from a single piece of oak. It extends from the lantern gear below, up through this floor, and continues to the floor above where another set of gears drives a second set of millstones. This mill can operate 2 pairs of stones simultaneously, doubling its capacity. The shaft is perfectly vertical, not almost vertical, perfectly vertical. When the mill was built, the builders used plumb lines and levels to ensure the shaft was exactly perpendicular to the ground. Any deviation from vertical would cause uneven wear on the bearings, would create wobble in the rotation, would eventually cause the gears to bind. Maintaining that verticality is one of the constant challenges of mill operation. The building settles. The ground beneath shifts slightly with seasonal changes, with frost heave in winter and drying in summer. The bearings wear. All of these factors can cause the shaft to drift out of true. So periodically, perhaps once a year, you have to check the alignment. You hang a plumb line from the top of the shaft and check it against measurements at the bottom. If it's drifted, you have to adjust the bearings, sometimes shimming them with thin pieces of wood or metal, sometimes even having to raise or lower the entire mounting structure slightly. It's painstaking work, but essential. On this floor, mounted on the vertical shaft, is another gear. This one is called the Great Spur Wheel. It's similar in construction to the pit wheel below, a wooden rim with teeth cut into it, rotating horizontally. It's smaller than the pit wheel, only about 6 feet in diameter, with 48 teeth. These teeth mesh with smaller lantern gears mounted on horizontal shafts that extend out to either side. Each of these horizontal shafts drives a millstone. But let's focus on one stone for now. One set of stones, one transformation. The millstones sit in the center of this floor. There are two of them, stacked vertically. The bottom stone, called the bedstone, is stationary. It's set into a massive wooden framework that holds it perfectly level and perfectly stable. The top stone, called the runner stone, rotates on top of the bedstone. The grain is fed into the gap between them and is crushed as the runner stone turns. Each stone is enormous, 4 feet in diameter, 8 inches thick, carved from a single piece of stone, usually a type of hard, coarse rock like French burr stone or millstone grit. The stone is incredibly heavy, perhaps 1,500 pounds. Think about that weight. 3/4 of a ton of solid rock, spinning at about 125 revolutions per minute, balanced on a central pivot point, kept level by the precision of the shaft and bearings below. The surface of the stones is not smooth. If it were smooth, the grain would just slide around without being crushed. Instead, the surface is carved with a pattern of grooves radiating from the center out to the edge. These grooves are called furrows. They serve multiple purposes. First, they provide a cutting edge. The grain is caught between the furrows on the upper stone and the furrows on the lower stone, and as they pass over each other at slightly different heights, they shear the grain rather than just crushing it. Shearing is more efficient. It requires less force and produces a finer, more uniform flour. Second, the furrows channel the grain. As the stone rotates, centrifugal force pushes the grain outward from the center. The furrows guide this outward movement, ensuring that the grain is evenly distributed across the stone's surface and that it eventually reaches the edge where the flour is discharged. Third, the furrows provide ventilation. As the stone grinds, it generates heat from friction. If the grain gets too hot, it can scorch, giving the flour a burnt taste. The furrows allow air to circulate between the stones, carrying away some of that heat. Cutting these furrows is a specialized skill. It's called dressing the stones, and it has to be done regularly because the furrows wear down with use. A skilled stone dresser can look at a stone and tell by eye which areas are worn and need deepening. They use special tools, hammers and picks with sharp points, to chip away at the stone's surface, recutting the furrows to the proper depth and angle. Dressing a pair of stones takes about a day of hard work. The stones have to be stopped, obviously. The runner stone has to be lifted off the bedstone, a task requiring levers and careful technique to avoid cracking the stone or injuring yourself. Then the stone dresser works systematically across the surface, recutting each furrow, checking the depth and angle constantly. The pattern of furrows varies depending on what grain you're grinding. For wheat, you want a certain pattern. For rye, slightly different. For barley or oats, different again. Each grain has different hardness, different size, different characteristics, and the furrow pattern optimizes the grinding for each type. But assuming the stones are properly dressed, watch them work. The runner stone rotates. Grain is fed into a hole in the center of the runner stone from a hopper above. The grain falls into the gap between the stones. Immediately, it's caught in the furrows. The rotating upper furrows pass over the stationary lower furrows. The grain is crushed, sheared, ground. The gap between the stones is adjustable, and this is critical. Too wide and the grain isn't crushed finely enough. You get coarse flour, almost like grits, suitable maybe for animal feed, but not for bread. Too narrow and the stones rub directly together, generating tremendous heat and friction, wearing the stones down quickly and potentially scorching the grain. The ideal gap is perhaps the thickness of a piece of parchment, a tiny distance. The stones should be close enough that the grain is thoroughly crushed, but not so close that they touch when no grain is between them. Adjusting this gap is done by raising or lowering the runner stone slightly, and this is controlled by a mechanism at the top of the vertical shaft. Up there, above the stones, accessible from the floor above, is a bridge tree. It's a wooden beam that can be raised or lowered using an adjustment screw or lever. The bridge tree supports the bearing in which the top of the vertical shaft rotates. Raise the bridge tree and the entire shaft rises slightly, lifting the runner stone away from the bedstone. Lower it and the stone moves closer. You adjust this gap constantly during operation. As grain flows in, you listen. The sound of the stones changes depending on the gap and the flow of grain. If there's too much grain, the stones labor, the sound becomes deeper, grinding. If there's too little grain, the stones run light, the sound becomes higher, almost ringing. If the gap is wrong, you hear it. Too wide and there's a rattling quality. Too narrow and there's a harsh scraping. Your ear tells you. Always your ear tells you. You can be standing on the floor above or below or outside, and you can hear the tone of the grinding and know if it's right. And if it's not right, you make adjustments. Open the grain feed a bit, close it a bit, raise the runner stone a fraction, lower it a touch. It's a constant process of listening and adjusting, listening and adjusting. The flour that's produced comes out the edge of the stones. There's a wooden housing around the stones, a circular box that catches the flour as it's thrown off by centrifugal force. The flour falls from this housing into chutes that direct it into sacks. And here's something interesting. The flour comes out hot. The friction of grinding generates heat. The stone surfaces heat up. The grain itself heats up as it's crushed. By the time it emerges as flour, it can be quite warm to the touch, perhaps 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more. This warmth is normal, expected. But if the flour comes out actually hot, too hot to hold comfortably, that means the stones are running too fast or too close together, and you need to adjust. The color of the flour tells you things too. Good wheat flour should be cream-colored, maybe with a very slight gray tinge from the bran if you're grinding whole wheat. If the flour is darker, grayish, it might mean the stones are too close, and you're grinding some of the stone itself into the flour. If the flour is too white, you might be grinding too coarse, and the bran isn't being incorporated. The smell, too. Fresh ground flour has a pleasant, slightly sweet smell. If you smell burning, the grain is scorching. If you smell mustiness, the grain might have been damp or moldy before grinding. Your senses are constantly evaluating the product. Stand here for a while. Watch the runner stone rotating. It's a blur of motion, spinning at 125 revolutions per minute. That's just over 2 revolutions per second. The furrows on the surface create a pattern, a spiral that seems to pulse as the stone spins. It's almost hypnotic, watching that pattern rotate over and over and over. The sound is a steady grinding rumble, not unpleasant. There's a rhythm to it. You can almost feel the grain being crushed, can almost sense the kernels breaking apart, the endosperm separating from the bran, the whole structure of the wheat berry being demolished and transformed. This is the purpose of the mill. Everything else, the water wheel, the shafts, the gears, the bearings, all of it is just mechanism. This is where the actual work happens. This is where transformation occurs. Grain goes in. Flour comes out. Food for the village, for the manor, for the monastery, for whoever pays the miller's fee. The fee, we should talk about the fee. The miller doesn't own the grain. People bring their grain to the mill, wait their turn, and the miller grinds it for them. The payment is a portion of the flour, usually 1/16. The miller takes 1/16 of the flour as payment for the service. This is how the miller makes a living. On a busy day, with many customers, 1/16 of each batch adds up. The miller accumulates flour, sells it, or trades it for other goods. It's a good living, usually, because everyone needs flour, and the mill is often the only one for miles around. But it's also a position of trust, and millers have a reputation, deserved or not, for dishonesty. The joke is that every miller has a golden thumb because they're always pressing their thumb on the scale when measuring out the customer's flour versus the miller's fee, giving themselves a bit extra. Whether this is fair or just prejudice against a profession that makes people dependent on them is hard to say. What's certain is that the mill is essential. Without it, people would have to grind grain by hand using querns, small hand-operated stone grinders. That's exhausting work and produces flour much more slowly. The mill does in an hour what would take a person days to do by hand. That's the value of all this machinery, all this complexity, all this harnessed power. It multiplies human capability. But maintaining it all is constant work. Everything wears. The water wheel's buckets split and need replacing. The main shaft's bearing wears and needs re-greasing or shimming. The pit wheel's teeth break and need replacing. The lantern gear's rungs wear down and need replacing. The millstone's furrows wear shallow and need redressing. The building itself, subjected to constant vibration, develops cracks and loosens joints that need retightening. A miller is part mechanic, part carpenter, part stone mason, part grain expert, part businessman. You have to understand water flow and hydrology. You have to understand mechanics and gearing ratios. You have to understand wood and how it behaves when wet and dry, hot and cold. You have to understand stone and how to dress it properly. You have to understand grain and flour and how to judge quality. You have to deal with customers, with the lord who owns the mill, with suppliers of materials. It's a demanding profession. You're on your feet all day. The work is physical, lifting sacks of grain, climbing ladders to check on equipment, replacing broken teeth or worn rungs, adjusting the stones, cleaning the machinery. The flour dust gets everywhere in your lungs, on your skin. Many millers develop breathing problems later in life from inhaling dust for decades. And the mill never really stops. Oh, you might shut it down overnight if there's no work, close the sluice gate, let the wheel stop turning. But during the day, during the busy seasons, it runs continuously. Grain comes in, flour goes out. The wheel turns, the gears mesh, the stones grind. Hour after hour, day after day. There's a meditation to it, if you let yourself feel it. The rhythm of the machine, the predictability of it, the way each part does exactly what it's designed to do, over and over. The clicking of the gears is like a mantra. The grinding of the stones is like breathing. You sync yourself to it. Your movements become time to the machine's rhythm. You check the grain flow in time with the rotation of the stones. You apply grease to the gears in the pauses between batches. You become part of the machine, in a way. Outside, the seasons change. Spring comes and the river runs high with snowmelt. The sluice gate has to be partially closed to prevent the wheel from turning too fast. Summer comes and the river drops. The sluice gate opens wider to maintain flow. Fall comes and the harvest begins. This is the busiest time. Everyone needs their grain ground. You work from dawn to past dusk, running the mill continuously, grinding batch after batch. Winter comes and the work slows. Some years the river freezes and you can't operate at all. You use that time for maintenance, for repairs, for dressing the stones, for replacing worn parts. But always, when the mill is running, there's that sound. That clicking, grinding, rumbling, rushing sound. It becomes the soundtrack of your life. You hear it in your sleep. You dream about gears meshing and stones turning. It's always there, in the background of your consciousness. And there's a pride in it. This machine, this complex assemblage of wood and stone and iron and water, works because you keep it working. The gears mesh because you keep them greased and aligned. The stones grind properly because you keep them dressed and gapped correctly. The wheel turns because you manage the water flow and maintain the buckets. The building stands because you repair it and shore it up and keep it level. People depend on you. The whole village depends on you. If the mill stops, bread stops. It's that simple. Your work directly feeds people. There's honor in that. There's purpose. Walk around the machinery floor one more time. The main shaft is still turning. that huge oak trunk rotating slowly and steadily. The pit wheel is still meshing with the lantern gear, click, 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 click. The vertical shaft is still rising through the ceiling, carrying power upward. The great spur wheel is still driving the millstone's gear. The runner stone is still spinning on the bedstone, crushing grain into flour. It's all still going. It's all still working. And it will keep working as long as the river flows and as long as someone maintains it. Think about the knowledge embedded in this machine. It wasn't designed by one person. It evolved over centuries. Countless millers and millwrights contributed to its development. Someone figured out that an overshot wheel is more efficient than an undershot wheel. Someone figured out the gear ratios needed to convert the slow rotation of the water wheel into the faster rotation of the millstone. Someone figured out that applewood teeth should be used instead of oak, so they break first. Someone figured out the pattern of furrows that grinds wheat most efficiently. Someone figured out how to balance a 3/4-ton stone on a vertical shaft and keep it level while it spins. All of that knowledge, all those small innovations and improvements, they're built into this machine. When you operate it, when you maintain it, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back hundreds of years. You're using techniques that were old when your grandfather was young, and presumably you'll pass them on to your son or your apprentice, and the tradition will continue. The mill is more than a machine. It's a repository of knowledge. It's a link between generations. It's a monument to human ingenuity and our ability to harness natural forces to serve our needs. And it's beautiful in its way. Not aesthetically beautiful, perhaps. It's a rough, functional thing built for work, not appearance. But there's a beauty in the way it all fits together, in the precision of the gearing, in the balance of the stones, in the efficiency of the design. Form follows function here. Every part has a purpose. Nothing is wasted. Everything is as it needs to be and no more. The water outside keeps flowing. The wheel keeps turning. The gears keep meshing. The stones keep grinding. The flour keeps flowing out, pale and warm and smelling of wheat. The mill keeps running. And somewhere, someone is taking that flour and mixing it with water and salt and yeast. They're kneading it into dough. They're letting it rise. They're shaping it into loaves. They're baking it in an oven. They're transforming the flour just as the mill transformed the grain. And then someone is breaking that bread, still warm from the oven. They're tasting it. They're eating it. They're being nourished by it. Their body is taking those complex carbohydrates and breaking them down into simple sugars and using those sugars for energy. They're being sustained. And it all started here, with water flowing over a wheel, with gears turning, with stones grinding. The mill is the crucial link in that chain. Without it, there's no flour. Without flour, there's no bread. Without bread, there's no life. Or at least a much harder life. So yes, the mill is important. The miller is important. This knowledge is important. This skill is important. The maintenance and operation of this machine matters. The sun is higher now. The morning is wearing on. More customers will be arriving soon with their sacks of grain. You'll need to keep the mill running, keep adjusting and monitoring and maintaining. The work never really stops. But for this moment, just this moment, stand here and appreciate it. The complexity, the elegance, the power, the tradition, the purpose. This is medieval engineering at its finest. This is humanity working with nature rather than against it, channeling the river's flow to serve human needs. The wheel turns, the gears mesh, the stones grind, the mill lives. And you are its keeper. You are the one who knows its sounds, who understands its rhythms, who can diagnose its problems and fix them. You are the one who keeps it running. You are the miller. Feel the vibration through the floor. Hear the clicking of the gears. Smell the flour dust and the river water and the animal grease and the oak wood. This is your world. This is your life. This is your craft. The click-click-click continues, steady and reliable. The grinding rumbles on, constant and powerful. The water rushes past outside, eternal and unstoppable. Everything is working. Everything is as it should be. The mill stands at the bend in the river, harnessing the flow, transforming grain into flour, serving the community, continuing a tradition that will outlast you and your children and your children's children. This is the mill. This is the work. This is the life. And the wheel keeps turning. The millstones are the heart. Everything else in the mill exists to serve them. The water wheel captures power. The gears transmit it. The shafts carry it upward. But the stones do the work. The stones transform. The stones are where grain dies and flour is born. Stand before them now. Two circular discs of stone, each one 4 feet across, 8 inches thick. The lower stone sits motionless in its wooden frame, bolted down, going nowhere. This is the bedstone, fixed, permanent, the foundation. The upper stone hovers just above it, spinning, floating on a cushion of grain and air. This is the runner stone, mobile, active, the dancer. The gap between them is almost nothing. If you could slide a piece of parchment into that gap, it would fit, barely. Maybe the thickness of 3 sheets, maybe 4, that's all. The runner stone spins at over 100 rotations per minute, a massive stone weighing 1,500 pounds, and it's separated from the bedstone below by a distance you could measure with your fingernail. This proximity is essential. The grain must be caught between the stones. It must be compressed, sheared, ground into progressively smaller particles. But the stones must never, ever touch. Never. Because if they touch, if stone grinds directly on stone with no grain between them, sparks happen. The friction of rock on rock at high speed generates heat, enough heat to create visible sparks. Little flashes of orange light as particles of stone are torn loose and heated to incandescence. And the air around the millstones is not just air. It's air filled with flour dust, a fine mist of organic particles, each one tiny, each one capable of combustion. Flour dust hanging suspended, drifting, settling, rising again with every movement of air. Flour dust is fuel. In the right concentration, mixed with air, it's as explosive as gunpowder. More explosive, perhaps, because it ignites more easily. A single spark in a cloud of flour dust can cause an explosion powerful enough to destroy the mill, to kill everyone inside, to send burning timbers flying across the village. It has happened many times. Throughout history, mills have exploded. The building erupts in a ball of flame. The roof lifts off. The walls blow outward. Everything inside is incinerated. The miller, any customers waiting, any apprentices or family members helping with the work, all gone in an instant. So the stones must never touch. This is the first law of milling, the absolute, inviolable rule. The gap must be maintained, always, no matter what. You check it constantly. Throughout the day, you monitor the gap. You listen to the sound of the grinding. You watch the flour as it emerges from between the stones. You feel the vibration through the floor. Every sense is attuned to the state of that gap. If the sound changes, if it becomes harsher, more scraping, you know the stones are getting too close. If you see sparks, tiny flashes of light in the dim interior, you know you've failed. You shut down immediately, close the sluice gate, stop the wheel, stop everything, check the stones, adjust the gap. Pray you caught it in time before the dust ignited. The fear of explosion is always there, background radiation in the miller's mind. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. The mill 3 villages over that exploded 5 years ago. The miller and his 2 sons died. The mill in the next county that exploded last harvest season. The blast was heard for miles. Or go back further. Your grandfather knew a man who lost his father to a mill explosion. The fear is real because the danger is real. So you maintain the gap, obsessively, carefully, with absolute attention. The stones themselves are remarkable objects. They're not local stone, not usually. Good millstones come from specific quarries known for producing the right kind of rock. French burstone is prized. It comes from quarries near Paris. The stone is a type of quartz, extremely hard, with a naturally rough texture that's perfect for grinding grain. The stone is not quarried in large blocks. Instead, it's extracted in sections, smaller pieces that are then assembled into a complete millstone. You can see the joints on the surface if you look closely. The individual pieces are fitted together and bound with iron bands to hold them in place. This composite construction is necessary because finding a single piece of stone 4 feet across and free of flaws is nearly impossible. The stone arrives at the mill rough, unfinished. A stone dresser shapes it, cuts it to exact specifications, carves the grinding surface. This initial dressing takes weeks of skilled labor. And then, once installed in the mill, the stones need periodic redressing as they wear, perhaps every few months depending on how much grain is being ground. Look at the surface of the bedstone. You can see it when the runner stone is lifted off for maintenance. The surface is not smooth. It's covered in grooves, channels cut into the stone radiating outward from the center. These are the furrows. They're perhaps a 1/4 inch deep at the center, shallowing toward the edges. Each furrow is maybe 1/2 an inch wide, with a raised ridge, called a land, between furrows. The pattern is called a hop, or sometimes a quarter dress, because the stone is divided into quarters, and each quarter has the same pattern repeated. Look at 1/4. The furrows begin at the center, radiating outward in a specific arrangement. Some are straight, running like spokes of a wheel. Others curve, sweeping gracefully from center to edge. This is not decorative. Every furrow has a purpose. The pattern creates a scissoring action between the upper and lower stones. As the runner stone rotates, its furrows pass over the bedstone's furrows at angles. The grain is caught between them. The edges of the furrows slice through the grain, shearing it rather than crushing it. Shearing is more efficient than crushing. It requires less force. It produces more uniform particles. It generates less heat. The difference between crushed grain and sheared grain is the difference between coarse meal and fine flour. The furrows also channel the grain. As the runner stone spins, centrifugal force pushes the grain outward. The furrows guide this movement, directing the grain along specific paths from center to edge. Some furrows, the master furrows, run straight and provide the main channels. Others, the secondary furrows, curve and intersect with the master furrows, ensuring the grain is evenly distributed across the stone surface. And the furrows ventilate. Air flows through them between the stones, carrying away heat and moisture. Without this ventilation, the grinding would overheat. The grain would scorch. The flour would be ruined. The depth and angle of the furrows matter enormously. Too shallow and they don't shear effectively. The grain slides along the surface without being cut. Too deep and too much grain accumulates in them, clogging the flow. The angle at which they're cut determines how aggressively they bite into the grain. A steeper angle cuts more aggressively, but wears faster. A shallower angle is more durable, but less efficient. Creating this pattern requires specialized tools and immense skill. The primary tool is called a mill bill. It's a type of chisel, but unique to the milling trade. The bill has a flat, wedge-shaped blade at one end, sharpened to a precise angle. The blade is mounted on a wooden handle long enough to give leverage. The stone dresser holds the bill in both hands. They position the blade against the stone surface at exactly the right angle and exactly the right location. Then they strike the end of the handle with a mallet. Pick. The blade chips into the stone, removing a small fragment. Move the bill slightly. Strike again. Pick. Another fragment. Move. Strike. Pick. Move. Strike. Pick. Hundreds of times, thousands of times, across the entire surface of the stone. Each pick removes perhaps a 1/4 teaspoon of stone dust and fragments. Each pick deepens the furrow by a fraction of a millimeter. Each pick must be placed with precision or the pattern will be wrong. The sound of stone dressing is distinctive. Pick, 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 a steady rhythm. The stone dresser develops a cadence, a pace they can maintain for hours. Pick, pick, pick. The sound echoes in the mill, sharp and clear. Pick, pick, pick. It's meditation and labor combined. Pick, pick, pick. And it's not just mechanical repetition. The dresser is constantly evaluating. They feel the resistance as the bill bites into the stone. Softer areas of the stone chip more easily. Harder areas resist. The dresser adjusts their striking force accordingly. They observe the chips that fly off. Large chips mean they're hitting too hard or the angle is wrong. Fine dust means they're cutting efficiently. They work systematically, usually starting at the center and working outward, or sometimes working one furrow at a time from center to edge. The pattern must be symmetrical. If one side of the stone has deeper furrows than the other, the grinding will be uneven. One side will do more work, wear faster, and the runner stone will become unbalanced. An unbalanced runner stone is dangerous. Remember, it weighs 1,500 pounds and spins at over 100 rotations per minute. If the weight is not evenly distributed, the stone will wobble. The wobbling creates vibrations that can damage the bearings, crack the stone, or even cause the stone to jump off its mounting. A stone dresser who creates an unbalanced stone has failed at their craft. Watch an experienced stone dresser work. They move with confidence. The bill strikes the stone in exactly the right place, at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right force. Pick, pick, pick. No wasted motion, no hesitation. They've dressed hundreds of stones over their career. Their hands know the work. Their eyes can judge depth and angle without measuring tools. Their ears hear the quality of the strike, whether it's true or off. And they're artists in a way. Each stone dresser has their own style, their own variation on the traditional hop pattern. Some prefer more master furrows. Some make the curves more pronounced. Some cut more aggressively. Some favor durability over efficiency. You can recognize a stone dresser's work if you know what to look for, the same way you can recognize a blacksmith by the way they shape a horseshoe or a carpenter by the way they cut a joint. But all good stone dressers share certain principles. The furrows must be evenly spaced. The depth must be consistent within each furrow, though furrows of different types may be different depths. The lands between furrows must be smooth and level, providing a grinding surface when grain is between the stones. The overall pattern must be balanced, distributing the work evenly. When the dressing is complete, the stone dresser cleans the surface, sweeping away all the stone dust and chips. Then they inspect their work. They might use a straight edge to check the lands are level. They might pour water on the surface and watch how it flows through the furrows, making sure there are no low spots or high spots. They might just run their hands over the surface, feeling for irregularities their eyes can't see. If everything is right, the stone is ready to be installed or reinstalled. If something is wrong, they keep working, more picking, more adjusting, until it's perfect. Because the stones must be perfect, or as close to perfect as human hands can make them. The quality of the flour depends on it. The efficiency of the mill depends on it. The safety of everyone in and around the mill depends on it. Now the runner stone is lowered back onto the bedstone. This is a delicate operation. The stone is suspended by chains or ropes from a lifting mechanism above. The mechanism allows the stone to be raised or lowered carefully, inch by inch. You can't just drop it into place. The impact could crack either stone. And you have to position it exactly right, centered on the bedstone, aligned with the drive shaft. The runner stone has a hole through its center. The drive shaft passes through this hole. There's an arrangement of crosspieces and bridges, called the rind, that sits in the hole and connects the stone to the shaft. The shaft turns, the rind turns, the stone turns. But the connection allows for a tiny amount of give. a fraction of flexibility that prevents the stone from cracking if it encounters sudden resistance. Lower the stone slowly. Watch the gap between runner and bedstone. The goal is to achieve the correct spacing, and this is where the tentering comes in. Tentering is the process of adjusting the gap between the stones. It's one of the most critical skills in milling. Too much gap and the grain isn't ground finely enough. Too little gap and the stones risk touching, creating sparks, causing explosion. The adjustment is made using the tentering screw. This is a large screw mechanism mounted above the stones, typically accessed from the floor above. The screw passes through a wooden beam, and the end of the screw supports the bearing in which the top of the vertical shaft rotates. Turn the screw one direction, and it raises the shaft, lifting the runner stone away from the bedstone. Turn it the other direction, and it lowers the shaft, bringing the stones closer together. But we're not talking about large adjustments. We're talking about millimeters, fractions of millimeters. The thickness of a human hair can make the difference between coarse flour and fine flour, between efficient grinding and sparking stones. Approach the tentering screw. It's a massive piece of metalwork, forged iron, threaded carefully by a skilled blacksmith. The threads must be precise and consistent, or the adjustment won't be smooth. The screw is perhaps 3 inches in diameter, with threads cut deep into its length. A wooden handle projects from the top, allowing you to turn it. Place your hand on the handle. Feel the wood worn smooth by generations of millers making this exact adjustment. You're going to turn it, but first you listen. The stones are grinding. You hear the tone of the grinding. It's a low rumble, steady, with a slight gritty quality. This tells you the gap is probably right, but you want to make it finer. You want flour that's smoother, more refined. Begin to turn the handle. Clockwise. The screw descends, pushing down on the bearing, pushing down on the shaft, lowering the runner stone toward the bedstone. Turn slowly. A quarter turn. Listen. The tone changes, becomes slightly lower, the gritty quality increases. Turn another quarter turn. Listen. Lower still. Now there's a different quality, almost a grinding overtone. Good. But don't go too far. Turn too much and the sound will change dramatically, becoming harsh, almost shrieking. That means the stones are too close, probably touching in spots. If you hear that sound, you reverse immediately, turning the handle counterclockwise, raising the stone, opening the gap. The ideal gap produces a steady grinding sound with a particular harmonic quality. It's hard to describe, but once you've heard it, you know it. Your ears become calibrated to that sound. You can distinguish between a gap of 3 sheets of parchment and a gap of 4 sheets, just by sound. The difference might be a quarter of a millimeter, but you hear it. And you feel it through the floor. The vibration changes with the gap. When the gap is right, the vibration is steady, rhythmic, almost soothing. When the gap is wrong, the vibration becomes irregular, with spikes and variations that you feel in your feet and legs. The tentering has to be adjusted throughout the day because the gap changes with use. The stones wear. The bedstone wears down in the center more than at the edges because more grain passes through the center. The runner stone wears unevenly too, depending on the hardness of the grain and the condition of the furrows. As the stones wear, the gap increases slightly and the grinding becomes coarser. So you adjust. You tenter down, bringing the stones closer together again. You also adjust for different grains. Wheat might grind best with one gap. Rye, which is slightly softer, might need a different gap. Barley, harder still, needs adjustment. Each grain has its ideal setting, and experienced millers know these settings instinctively. They set the tentering screw to the right position for the grain being ground without even thinking about it. And you adjust for the customer's needs. Some customers want fine flour, suitable for the Lord's white bread. This requires a tight gap, multiple passes through the stones if necessary. Some customers want coarser meal, suitable for peasant bread or animal feed. This requires a wider gap. The same grain can produce different products depending on how you set the tentering. The screw mechanism itself requires maintenance. The threads wear. The bearing that the screw pushes against wears. The wooden beam that houses the screw can crack under the constant pressure. You inspect the tentering screw regularly, looking for signs of wear or damage. You grease the threads to reduce friction. You check that the screw is turning smoothly without binding or catching. If the screw becomes worn enough that it doesn't hold position, if it slips and the runner stone drops suddenly, that's catastrophic. The stones will definitely touch. Sparks will fly. Explosion is likely. So the tentering screw is treated with great respect, maintained carefully, replaced when necessary. Stand here for a moment and watch the stones working. The runner stone is a blur of motion. You can see the furrows on its surface as it spins, a mesmerizing pattern of lines and curves that seem to pulse and shift. Grain is being fed into the eye of the stone, the hole at the center. It disappears into the gap between the stones. Seconds later, flour emerges at the edges, fine and pale, carrying the warmth of the grinding. The transformation happens in that gap. In that tiny space, measured in fractions of millimeters, the grain kernel, which has been dried and stored, perhaps for months, which has retained its structure and integrity, enters the gap as a whole seed. It encounters the furrows. The upper furrow edge passes over the lower furrow edge in a scissoring motion. The kernel is caught between them, sheared. The outer bran layer splits away. The endosperm inside cracks. The kernel breaks into larger pieces. Those pieces are carried outward by the centrifugal force of the spinning stone, encountering more furrows, being sheared again and again, breaking into progressively smaller particles. By the time the grain reaches the outer edge of the stone, it has been sheared dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. It has been reduced from a whole kernel several millimeters long to particles measured in fractions of a millimeter. It has become flour. The flour that emerges is warm. Touch it as it comes off the stone. It's noticeably warm, maybe 30 degrees above the ambient temperature. This warmth comes from the friction of grinding, the mechanical energy being converted to heat. This is normal and expected, but it's also something to monitor. If the flour becomes too hot, almost hot to touch, that indicates the stones are running too fast or too close. You need to adjust. The color of the flour tells you about the grinding. If you're grinding whole wheat, the flour should be cream-colored with brown flecks from the bran. If you're grinding refined wheat where the bran has been separated out first, the flour should be pale, almost white. If the flour is grayish, that might indicate the stones are touching and you're grinding stone dust into the flour. If there are black specks, that might indicate the grain was dirty or moldy. The texture tells you about the gap. Run a pinch of flour between your fingers. Feel the particles. Fine flour should feel like silk, almost intangible. Coarser flour feels gritty, sandy. If you feel individual grains of unground kernel, the gap is too wide or the grain is flowing through too fast. And you taste it. Every good miller tastes the flour regularly throughout the day, just a pinch on your tongue. You're checking for sweetness, which indicates good wheat and proper grinding. You're checking for bitterness, which might indicate rye or poor quality grain. You're checking for any burnt taste, which would indicate overheating. You're checking for off flavors that might indicate mold or spoilage in the grain. Your senses are your quality control. Eyes, ears, hands, tongue. You use all of them constantly, monitoring the product, evaluating the process, making adjustments. But we haven't talked about how the grain gets into the stones. This is the hopper and damsel system, and it's perhaps the most ingenious part of the whole mill. The grain is stored in the floor above, the grain loft. Sacks and sacks of it brought by customers waiting to be ground. When it's time to grind a batch, you pour the grain into the hopper. This is a large wooden box, shaped like an inverted pyramid, perhaps 4 feet across at the top, narrowing to a small opening at the bottom. The sides are angled steeply, so the grain flows downward under gravity. The hopper is positioned directly above the runner stone. The bottom opening of the hopper aligns with the eye of the stone, that central hole. But between the hopper and the stone is a critical component, the shoe. The shoe is a wooden chute, a channel that connects the hopper to the stone. It's angled slightly, and the grain flows down it, guided toward the eye of the stone. But here's the clever part. The shoe doesn't rest on anything solid. It's suspended, hanging loosely, supported only by leather straps or ropes attached to the hopper above. And underneath the shoe, extending up through the floor from the runner stone's drive shaft below, is the damsel. The damsel is not a person. It's a piece of the machinery, but it's called the damsel for reasons lost to history. Some say it's because it chatters constantly, like a gossiping maiden. Others say it's because it's crucial but often overlooked, like women's work. Whatever the origin, the name has stuck. The damsel is an iron rod attached to the top of the vertical shaft, the same shaft that drives the runner stone. As the shaft rotates, the damsel rotates with it. But the damsel is not perfectly straight or perfectly round. It has flat sections milled into the rod, or sometimes it has projections, small bumps or knobs sticking out. As the damsel rotates, these flats or bumps strike the bottom of the shoe. Tap. The shoe jumps slightly. The grain inside the shoe slides forward. Tap. The shoe jumps again. More grain flows. Tap, 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 tap. The damsel rotates rapidly, perhaps 125 rotations per minute, and if it has 4 flats or bumps, that's 500 taps per minute. About 8 taps per second. Clack, 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 clack. The sound is constant, rapid, rhythmic. This is the heartbeat of the mill. This clacking tells you grain is flowing. If the clacking stops, grain has stopped flowing. If the clacking becomes irregular, something is wrong with the feed mechanism. The brilliance of this system is that it's self-regulating. When the runner stone is turning, the damsel is turning, and the shoe is being tapped, and grain is flowing. When the stone stops, the damsel stops, the tapping stops, and grain stops flowing. You can't accidentally feed grain when the stone isn't turning. The mechanism ensures they work together. And the rate of grain flow can be adjusted. If you want more grain to flow into the stone, you adjust the shoe so it hangs lower, closer to the damsel. The damsel strikes it harder, making it jump more vigorously, and more grain flows. If you want less grain to flow, you raise the shoe, reducing the impact of the damsel's tapping, and less grain flows. This adjustment is made by a simple mechanism, usually a rope or cord attached to the front of the shoe. Pull the rope, and the shoe tilts, changing the angle and the distance from the damsel. It's a real-time, on-the-fly adjustment you can make while the mill is running. Why does the rate of grain flow matter? Because the stones work best with a consistent, moderate feed rate. Too much grain and the stones can't handle it. The grain accumulates between the stones, creating excessive resistance. The stone slows down. The motor, which in this case is the water wheel and gear train, has to work harder. Things start to labor. You hear it in the sound, a deeper, struggling quality. And if you feed too much grain too fast, the stones can choke, jamming with grain, and the whole system can bind up, potentially causing damage. Too little grain and the stones run light, spinning with almost nothing between them. This is dangerous because it increases the risk of the stones touching and creating sparks. It also wears the stones faster because they're grinding on minimal material. And it's inefficient because the mill is running but not producing much flour. The ideal feed rate keeps the gap between the stones filled with grain, providing constant material to be ground, but not so much that the stones are overwhelmed. You judge this by sound and by watching the flour output. When the rate is right, the grinding sounds steady and full, not struggling but not hollow either. The flour emerges at a consistent rate, not in bursts or trickles. and you adjust constantly. As the grain level in the hopper drops, the pressure of grain pushing down on the shoe changes. You compensate by adjusting the shoe position. Different grains flow differently. Wheat with smooth, rounded kernels flows easily. Oats with rough, elongated kernels flow less smoothly. You adjust for these differences. The hopper itself needs attention. Over time, grain dust accumulates on its inner surfaces, especially in the corners. This dust can become compacted, reducing the effective volume of the hopper and potentially affecting grain flow. So you clean the hopper regularly, sweeping out the accumulated dust. And you watch for pests. Grain stores attract rodents and insects. Mice and rats can gnaw through sacks and contaminate the grain. Weevils and other grain insects can infest the grain, laying eggs that hatch into larvae that eat the kernels from inside. You set traps for rodents. You inspect the grain for signs of infestation. Infested grain has a particular smell, slightly musty and sweet. If you grind infested grain, the flour will be contaminated, unsuitable for human consumption. The leather straps that suspend the shoe wear out. Leather dries and cracks, especially in the dusty environment of the mill. You check these straps regularly, looking for signs of wear. Replace them before they fail, because if a strap breaks while the mill is running, the shoe will drop. The grain flow will change unpredictably, and you'll have to stop the mill to fix it. The damsel itself needs checking. The constant tapping wears the flats or bumps. Eventually, they become too worn to effectively strike the shoe. The tapping becomes lighter, the grain flow decreases, and you have to replace or recut the damsel. This is usually done by removing the old damsel and installing a new one that's been prepared in advance. Not a difficult job, but one that requires stopping the mill. Listen to the clacking now. Clack, 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 clack. It's rapid and regular like a heartbeat, like a drum beat, tribal almost, hypnotic. The rhythm enters your consciousness and stays there. You find yourself breathing in sync with it. Your movements align with it. It becomes the temporal framework of your work. Clack, 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 grain flowing, stone turning, flour producing, the system working as designed. Clack, 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 the sound of productivity, the sound of transformation. Clack, 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 the heartbeat of the mill. And all around in the air is the dust. Flour dust hangs in the light that streams through the small windows. It drifts and swirls with every movement of air. It settles on every surface, coating everything in a fine white powder. It gets into your hair, onto your clothes, into your lungs with every breath. The dust is beautiful in the light. Each particle catches the sunlight, glowing like a tiny star. The air becomes almost luminous with it, a haze of white gold light filling the space. But it's also dangerous. Remember, this dust is fuel. In the right concentration, it's explosive. So you manage the dust. You keep the mill as clean as practical, sweeping up accumulated flour regularly. You ensure there's adequate ventilation, with air flowing through the building to prevent dangerous concentrations from building up. You eliminate any potential sources of ignition. No open flames in the mill, ever. No lanterns, no candles, no fires. Even on the darkest winter day, you work in natural light only, or you don't work at all. And you're aware, constantly aware, that you're working in an environment that could explode. It's not paranoia, it's reality. The danger is real. Mills do explode. Millers do die. The fear is rational and appropriate. But the mill keeps running, the wheel keeps turning, the gears keep meshing, the damsel keeps tapping, the stones keep grinding. Clack, clack, clack. Flour keeps emerging, warm and pale and fine. Hours pass. The sun moves across the sky. The light through the windows changes angle, moving from east to west. Morning becomes afternoon. Batch after batch of grain is ground. Sack after sack of flour is filled and carried away. Customers come and go, bringing grain, taking flour, paying their fees. You're constantly in motion, pouring grain into the hopper, adjusting the shoe to maintain proper feed rate, monitoring the sound of the grinding, checking the gap between the stones by listening and feeling, adjusting the tentering screw when necessary, sweeping up spilled flour, greeting customers, discussing the quality of their grain, collecting fees, recording transactions. The work is physical. You're lifting sacks of grain, 60 or 80 pounds each, carrying them to the hopper, hoisting them up, pouring them in. You're climbing ladders to check on the mechanisms above. You're bending to sweep, to inspect, to adjust. Your back aches. Your arms tire. Your hands rough and calloused from years of this work, grip and lift and manipulate. But there's a satisfaction in it. The mill is running smoothly. The mechanisms are working as they should. The flour being produced is high quality. Customers are satisfied. The rhythm of the work, the cycle of pour, grind, collect, repeat, has its own meditative quality. And there's pride. This is your mill, your responsibility, your craft. You keep it running. You understand its moods and needs. You can diagnose problems by sound and feel. You can adjust and optimize its operation. You're not just an operator, you're a craftsman, an engineer, a guardian of a complex, valuable, essential machine. The afternoon wears on. The sun begins to lower toward the western horizon. The light becomes golden, then orange, then red. The shadows lengthen. The day is ending. And finally, the last customer leaves. The last sack of flour is filled and carried away. The hopper is empty. No more grain to grind. The work day is done. It's time to shut down the mill. This is a process, not just flipping a switch. You can't just walk away and let the mill run unattended. The mechanisms need to be stopped properly, safely, in the right sequence. First, you ensure the hopper is completely empty. No grain should be left in the system overnight. If grain sits in the hopper or the shoe, it can attract moisture from the air, can become a breeding ground for mold or insects. So you make sure every last kernel has passed through the stones. The clacking of the damsel continues for a while, tapping the empty shoe. Clack, clack, clack. But with no grain to feed, the stones are running light. You can hear it in the grinding sound. It's become lighter, almost hollow. Time to stop. You go outside to the sluice gate. The sun is low now, touching the horizon. The river looks dark, almost black, with streaks of orange and red reflected from the sky. The air is cool. You can smell the evening, that particular scent of damp earth and vegetation as the day's heat fades. Grasp the handle of the windlass. You're going to close the sluice gate, cutting off water flow to the wheel. But you don't just release the handle and let the gate drop. That would be too sudden, too violent. The gate is heavy. If it drops quickly, it could damage itself or the channel. Instead, you control the descent. The rope is wound around the windlass spindle. As you slowly turn the handle in the opposite direction from opening, the rope unwinds. The weight of the gate pulls it down, but the friction of the rope on the spindle and your hand controlling the handle regulate the speed. The gate lowers slowly. You can hear the water flow changing as the opening decreases. The rush of water into the mill race reduces. The wheel, still turning, begins to receive less water. Its buckets fill less completely. The wheel begins to slow. Continue lowering the gate. Inch by inch it descends. The gap at the bottom of the gate gets smaller. Less water, less water. The wheel is definitely slowing now. You can hear the difference in the sound. The rushing is quieter. The splashing is less frequent. The groaning of the wheel becomes less strained. Lower, lower. The gate is almost closed. Just a trickle of water now, seeping underneath. The wheel has slowed to a crawl. The buckets are barely filling. The massive structure is coasting on momentum, gradually losing speed. Lower the gate the final distance. It seats against the stone sill at the bottom of the channel. The trickle stops. No water is entering the mill race. The wheel continues to turn for a moment, emptying the last water from its buckets. Turn. Turn, slower, slower. And then it stops. The wheel is motionless for the first time since early morning. Water drips from the buckets. Drip, drip, drip. Individual drops falling back into the river below. Drip, drip. The dripping will continue for a while as the residual water in the buckets and in the structure of the wheel gradually empties out. But the wheel has stopped. The primary power source is no longer feeding the system. Go back inside. The mill is still, not silent because the mechanisms are still moving, coasting on inertia but quieting. The great horizontal shaft is still rotating but slowing. The pit wheel is still turning, still meshing with the lantern gear. The vertical shaft is still carrying power upward. The runner stone is still spinning but slowing noticeably. The clacking of the damsel continues but at a decreasing rate. Clack, 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 slower, clack, 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 slower still. The rhythm that has been constant all day is fading, dying away. The grinding sound changes too. As the stone slows, the pitch drops. The rumble becomes deeper, more drawn out. The furrows pass over each other at reduced speed. The sound becomes almost mournful, elegiac, like a song ending. Watch the runner stone. You can see it slowing now. Where before it was a blur, now you can actually track individual furrows as they rotate past. The stone is massive and has tremendous angular momentum, but without power input, friction is gradually bringing it to rest. The whole mill is winding down. Every moving part is slowing. The sound is decreasing. The vibration is lessening. You can feel it through the floor. The steady thrum that has been present all day is fading, becoming intermittent, then sporadic. Clack, clack. The damsel gives a final few taps, then stops. The shoe hangs motionless, no more heartbeat. The runner stone continues to rotate, slower and slower. You can hear the individual rotations now as the furrows pass over the bedstone furrows. Grind, 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 slower, grind, grind, slower still. The great horizontal shaft is barely moving now. The pit wheel's teeth disengage from the lantern gear one final time. Click, no more clicking. The teeth have stopped meshing. The runner stone makes a final revolution. Grind, and stops. Silence. Not complete silence, because the river is still flowing outside, a constant background rush. But the mechanical sounds, the sounds of the mill working, have ceased. No clicking, no grinding, no clacking, no groaning. The mill is quiet. And the vibration is gone. The floor beneath your feet is still, solid. The building is no longer humming with transmitted energy. It's just a building now. Wood and stone. Inert. Stand in this silence for a moment. It's profound. After a full day of constant sound and vibration, the absence is almost shocking. Your ears ring slightly, adjusting to the quiet. Your body, attuned to the rhythm of the machines, feels strangely adrift without that temporal anchor. But there's a peace in it too. The work is done. The mechanisms have performed as they should. Everything has stopped safely, properly, in the right order. No disasters, no explosions, no breakdowns. A successful day. Walk through the mill one more time. Inspect the mechanisms in their resting state. The main shaft, still and silent, looks somehow larger in repose. The pit wheel, with its 84 applewood teeth, sits motionless. The lantern gear, its 24 rungs no longer being struck, hangs quiet on its vertical shaft. The runner stone, with its hot pattern of furrows, rests on the bedstone, the gap between them maintained even in stillness. Everything is as it should be. The gear teeth show normal wear, no cracks or splits. The bearings, when you place your hand on them, are warm but not hot. The stones are intact, no chips or fractures visible. The framework of the building is sound, no new cracks in beams, no loosened joints. The mill has survived another day. It will be ready for tomorrow. Climb the ladder to the grain loft one more time. The sacks that were here this morning, full of grain, are gone, replaced by sacks full of flour, ready to be collected by their owners. The transformation is complete. Grain has become flour. The mill has fulfilled its purpose. The light in the loft is dim now. The sun has set. Outside the small windows, the sky is deep blue fading to black. The first stars are visible. Night is coming. Come back down the ladder. Walk to the door. Look back at the silent machinery one last time. In the fading light, the mill looks different, almost peaceful. The dust is settling. The air is clearing. The whole space feels calm, restful. This is not abandonment. This is earned rest. The mill has worked hard all day. The mechanisms have turned thousands of times. The stones have ground hundreds of pounds of grain. The gears have meshed millions of times. Everything has performed under load, under stress, under constant demand. Now, finally, they can rest. Step outside. Close the door behind you. The evening air is cool and clean, a relief after the dusty interior. The river flows past in the darkness, its sound constant and soothing. The wheel sits motionless in the current, water flowing past and around it, no longer driving it, just moving on toward the sea. The village is quiet. Smoke rises from chimneys, straight up in the still evening air. The smell of cooking fires, of bread baking from the flour ground today, the cycle completing. Grain to flour to bread to nourishment to life. And tomorrow it will begin again. The sun will rise. Customers will arrive with grain. You'll open the sluice gate. Water will flow. The wheel will turn. The gears will mesh. The damsel will clack. The stones will grind. The mill will live again. But not tonight. Tonight the mill sleeps. The mechanisms rest. The river flows past, unharmed, unchanneled, free. The water continues its journey to the sea, carrying stories of the mill, of the work done, of the flour produced, of the rhythm and clacking and grinding that filled the day. And you, the miller, you sleep too. In your cottage near the mill, close enough to hear if anything goes wrong, far enough to have your own space. You lie in your bed, feeling the absence of vibration. The stillness is strange at first. Your body is accustomed to that constant thrum. It takes a while to adjust to the quiet. But gradually you relax. The aches of the day's work settle into your muscles. Your hands, gripping and lifting all day, unclench. Your back, bent over grain sacks and machinery, straightens against the mattress. Your ears, assaulted by constant sound, find peace in the quiet. Outside the river flows. The wheel drips its last remaining water. Drip, 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 slower now, drip, 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 until even that stops. The wheel is dry, silent, still. The mill stands in the darkness, a dark shape against the darker night, a monument to human ingenuity, a repository of accumulated knowledge and skill, a tool that multiplies human capability. A machine that serves, that nourishes, that sustains. Inside, in the darkness, the stones wait. The bedstone, solid and stable, holding its position. The runner stone, balanced above it, maintaining the gap even at rest. The furrows on both stones, carved with such care, ready to shear grain when motion returns. The teeth of the pit wheel, applewood chosen to sacrifice themselves if needed. The rungs of the lantern gear, worn smooth by constant use. The great horizontal shaft, that massive oak trunk, resting in its bearings after a day of constant rotation. All of it waits, patient, enduring, ready. And as the river flows silently past the sleeping wheel, moving towards the sea, the machine rests. The work is done. Sleep well.